Today, Kilroy goes off the shelf on expansions. Now, what do I mean by expansions? Well, just that. It expands the game. It's in addition to the original game, and it adds additional content, whether that be, new scenarios, new gameplay, maybe fixing or streamlining previous gameplay, fixing some rules. I've got a segment where I talked about errata. You can go check that out. Or update kits. You can go check that out. I'm really not talking about either one of those. I'm talking about intentionally building a package that has additional content that you can add to the game. Now, in the general board gaming hobby, let's use air quotes there, general board gaming hobby, expansions are common. They're expected. There are certain aspects of the general board gaming hobby that require expansions. If you go into the living card game series from Fantasy Flight, and other game mechanisms use this as well, but expansion is the norm. I mean, if you started and stopped with just the original game, your replayability and your satisfaction with that game content is going to be pretty low. You need to have these extra and continual expansions to get the full feel of it. And expansions are just, in that general board gaming hobby, oh, I got to use your quotes again, it's very common. Now, in the wargaming hobby, or our segment of the hobby, it's not as common. It's still there, but it hasn't become as big of a requirement or a need or desired as you see in the general board gaming hobby. It's still there, but it usually kind of comes in two flavors. There's the expansion side, which is relatively small, and then you have like the series side. And series, in my opinion, are really kind of probably not expansions. Those are just a continuation of the game or the series with pretty much standalone content. So if it's standalone, meaning that you can play it by itself and do not need to use the original, I really don't treat that as an expansion. I treat that as a standalone or an extension of the series, okay? My first experience with Wargame Expansions was Cross of Iron, and this is, way back in the 80s. So expansions in the war games have been around for a long time. In fact, they very well may predate the general board gaming hobby in that regard. So you had Cross of Iron and Crescendo of Doom, which were expansions to Squad Leader. And so what these added new content. They added, new boards, they added new rules, they added new units, they added some different countries, they added, tanks and artillery and the like. And so it truly was an expansion. You needed to have Squad Leader to play. In fact, this is the prototype of the primary expansions in our industry. This gave birth to, Advanced Squad Leader. This is the starter kit. I don't have the Advanced Squad Leader, notebook and all the other stuff that goes along with it. But Advanced Squad Leader is the living card game version of expansions in the wargaming universe. There's so much out there for Advanced Squad Leader. That is, you need to have the core set to play, and what it is, it adds on maps, it adds on units, it adds on different battles, it adds on, more and more content in an expansion type format. And in that regard, small unit tactical games, platoon, squad level, even individual or man-to-man level, those are very ripe for expansions. And those are some of our more common expansions that we see in this game, in our industry. Texas Arrows is an expansion for Band and Brothers, which is a small unit tactical game. Warfighter, which is an individual. Look at that. Look at those kits there. Those are pretty big boxes there. Foot lockers, I think is what they call those. Those are just chocked full of expansions, additional cards that add different forces and different scenarios and the like. So, again, that really follows kind of the living card game model of the general board gaming universe into the wargaming universe. But, there still are other expansions in our hobby. I mean, my second experience with expansions was Attack, from Eagle Games. And you needed to have the core game in order to play this. This basically added on, the rest of the world and added on some different rules for naval and the like. But you needed to have the core game to play this. This was not a standalone, and it came in a huge box. I mean, this is basically, kind of a combination of Risk and Axis and Allies taken to a different level. But other, games are ripe for expansion as well, and air games. I mean, this was my second expansion that I ever encountered, Dauntless, which was an expansion to Air Force. You needed to have the Air Force game to play it because it had the counters and had the map boards, so to speak. They're pretty nondescript map boards. But it added a whole bunch of new aircraft to the mix in that regard. In that same vein, Wing Leader is just full of expansion. This is Wing Leader Victories, and there's also another edition which kind of goes the later years of the war, is Wing Leader Supremacy. It's full of expansions. It just keeps adding more and more content. So, small unit tactical and air games are very, they really lend themselves to having expansions that can be added to it. In that same vein, you have, oh my God, this is heavy, World at War, Storming the Gap. So the World at War series had expansion, but then when they came out with World War E5, they came out with this as part of, I think, the Kickstarter, but also for sale as well, as the expansion pack. Again, chocked full of content. Again, small unit tactical lends itself to it because you can just add a scenario. You can add a few maps, you can add some new counters or some new country units, and you can add a few scenarios, and wham, bam, you got yourself an expansion. So, that is where a lot of our expansions in the industry are today. But in some of the bigger games, there are expansions as well. I mean, Labyrinth is, basically continuing on into, started in 2001 and covered right after when the war against terror started, but then has continued on. They come out with an update of cards or a set of cards that brings the conflict forward. So you have a continuation of the game through, and the cards are events that have, events that have taken place during that time period to kind of give you a effect of the history of what's going on. So they have these sets of cards that bring it on into the future. So that's full of expansions. I mean, you need to have the base game to play it. You can't play it without. Another series that lives on expansion is the Command and Color series. This is Command and Color Ancients, expansion number 1, which you need to have the game, but there's also Command and Colors. There's Command and Colors Medieval now, but there's Command and Colors Napoleonic. They have expansions that you need to have the base game, and then you add these expansions on. They're going to bring in new units, new scenarios, and maybe some new rules that are specific to those scenarios or to those units. Again, a ripe use of example or expansions in our hobby. Also, the Great Battles of History. I kind of moved this down because you can't see it. Great Battles of History. I mean, this is SPQR. There's also the Great Battles of Alexander. But, I mean, they had expansions for each of those in the series that came out with and they would usually come out in a Ziploc with new rules or new modules, maybe new maps, of course, and counter sheet or so of new units, and you can add on to the game. You have to have the core game, but then you can add on to the game in that respect. So that's kind of how our hobby does expansions. There are examples of expansions. It's not as prevalent as it is in the general board gaming hobby, but it is still there. And in some instances, like Warfighter, it's there with a vengeance. So what do you guys think about expansions? Do you like expansions? Do you like this concept of having a core game and then adding new content that, you know, hopefully is a little bit less expensive, but you still get enough bang for your buck in the Ziploc baggie or the package to add on to that? What do you think about that? As I said, you know, Squad Leader has been the, you know, primary force in that, and small unit tactical games, you know, really lend themselves to that. But, you know, overall, you know, we don't have as many expansions, I don't think, as in relation or proportionally to the other parts of the hobby, but we still have it. And what do you think about it? Thought I'd share that with you today.
Hello all. Well, I'm back with some errata, but we wargamers are used to that. believe I said Attack was my second expansion, but I also said Dauntless was my second expansion. Well, which is it? Actually, Crescendo of Doom was my second expansion, and Dauntless was my third. I also want to expand on my expansion talk with Combat Commander, you know, another small unit tactical, go figure, that has some expansions and is kind of ripe for expansions. But there was also some expansions to War Galley, Salamis expansion, and Flying Colors had some expansions as well. So there you have it. More expansions, more bang for your buck.